In this lesson, we're going to start adding all of our static meshes to our level. Alright, so in between lessons we went ahead and we talked about the process for scaling static meshes properly and how to fit them, and kind of starting to work into some of the concepts of level design. We just figured out that level design doesn't have to be perfect. We can have things like windows kind of sticking inside of walls, and we can have little areas like this, and it's okay to fix things like that by just simply covering it up. Okay, it's not something that anyone would ever really see anyway. Okay, so level design is a little bit of trickery. Okay, even in AAA games, you would see. If you ever notice, if you fall through a level, you see all kinds of stuff that just kind of blows your mind on how that level was built and things like that. So you're kind of getting an inside look at what that looks like. All right, so now, before we get started with adding all of our static meshes to our building and really starting to make this look like some sort of gas station or something like that, what I want to do is I want to show you really quickly on how to select transparent objects. One thing that I noticed in between lessons was I was having a really hard time selecting these glass objects in my perspective view. Now I can select them okay in my front or my side view or top view here, but selecting them in my perspective view is a little difficult. Well, the reason that is because we have transparency selections turned off. If we come right up here, we can activate that and allow translucent selections, and then I can now select my glass objects, and that becomes very, very handy. Okay. Now the reason that you might want that off is you might select one of those and not even know it, because it is very difficult to see, because selecting another object highlights in purple, whereas translucent objects, they do highlight in purple, but they are a little difficult to see. So if you want to be able to select those, you can do so. Now I want that on for right now because I want to show you another trick here. Notice that we used all of these glass objects here, and they're all the same. So what happens if we want to kind of switch that up to where we want some glass objects that aren't as broken and we want some that are completely full? So how do we change that very quickly? I don't want to have to delete this out, resize it, and place it in again. Well, what you can do is actually double click on this glass object, and that's going to bring up your static mesh actor properties. Okay, so the name of this object is static mesh actor 23. And in here, you'll notice that we have static mesh actor. If we expand out static mesh component, we can see that we have a static mesh parameter here, and we could actually load in a different static mesh in its place. So if I go to my content browser, I can look in here and I see that I have this full glass window, and I have this one that's not so broken, okay, like our previous one. So let's select this one here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply hit Use Selected Object in Content Browser. That's going to switch that object, and it's also going to keep my scale values. So if I close this down and I look in here with that selected, you'll see that my glass has been input and it's working perfectly. Okay, so I've got a little bit of glass in there, some of it's broken, some of it's not. So now what I can do is very quickly just come in here and just start changing this up. So double click on it, go to the mesh that you want to use in your content browser. So I'm going to use this full glass here, and I'm going to use selected, close that down, and notice the changes that we've made. Okay, so this is going to be extremely helpful. Now in between lessons you can go ahead and you can change that up however you see fit. You know the technique for using that. Now what we want to do at this point is we want to start collaborating on what static meshes we want to use on our building here. What kind of building are we creating? Are we creating some sort of garage or something like that? And that's kind of the idea that I have here. So looking at this level, if I close down my content browser, I want to be able to add in like some vehicles or something like that, just to kind of make this look like a garage. I'll put a ramp out here, so that way those vehicles could leave if you wanted vehicles in your level, something like that. And I want to kind of make this look industrial, so I'm going to use like heavy metal beams and struts and things like that. We've got into these windows and things like that, so we're kind of on the right track. So opening up our content browser, let's go ahead and go to the environments folder, and I want to look up let's look up something like beams. So we can see that we have several different types of beams in here. So we have a couple of heavy metal beams, and then we have this strut support, and these look great in this level here. They'll work out really well. So we have an I-beam A 1, and you can see that it's 28 and then, or 128, and then we have an I-beam that's 256 units. So let me go ahead and grab the longer one and drag this out. And let's start to do a couple of things. Let's build a little bit of like a frame around some of these windows. So if I close this down and I go into my front view here, I can go ahead and kind of start to frame this out a little bit. Okay, and we could split this in half. We could scale these out however we see fit. If I want to scale them, I'm going to go ahead and just drag that across to the bottom of the floor there. And I know I'm in my front view, but it looks like I'm kind of looking through the back here. I think this may have been the front, but that's okay. It's not a big issue. Okay, so looking at this, I'm just going to move that into position, make sure that that's on the floor. We can scale that up. So if we grab our scale tool, we can type in some values here. So let's go to our move tool and let's switch to local. And we're going to be in the Z direction. So if I take this up, I can hit 2, and you'll notice that that makes that 512 units. That goes all the way up to the top. I don't want to go quite that high, so I'm going to do 1.5. Okay, that's pretty close. Let's do 1.75 and see what that gives us. Still not quite there, so let's go in between that. So we're going to do 1.625. Pretty close. So we're kind of playing around with some of these values here. So this is going to be less than 1.625. So I think if I add 1.5 and 0.0625, which is going to give me 1.5625, that's going to be the perfect value there. So that sets up great there. So that's snapped together, and then I can go ahead and hold down Alt, and I could come over to this side. Okay, put a beam kind of in the middle of that doorway there. So I'm just trying to center this up between the window and the door. And that looks centered there, pretty close. Let's go over one more. There we go. Let's go ahead and take this to 8. I think that's going to give us a little bit of a better value here. Actually, I might go to 16. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so let's take this one, and that's right where I want it to be. That's looking good. Okay, so then we can come in and we could even create another beam like right here. So I can hit Alt X, or I can hit Control D to duplicate that and then rotate it. Okay, so I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Grab my move tool and let's move this in the world space. Pull that up there. Just kind of get an idea of where that's at in our front view. And I'm just going to drag that down. And then let's pull it forward. So that way it's sticking out on front of our object. Now you'll see that it's kind of cutting through our I-beam here. And it's not going to sit exactly on this line. So what I want to do is go ahead and drop that down to 8. And that will cinch that up right there. Okay, now looking at this side, we're cutting through completely, so we need to drop that down in our scale here. So let's take that to 1.5, and that's perfect. Okay, now you can scale that in any direction that you want. If you want to make it a little bit thicker, let's switch that to our local so we know which direction to scale that. So in my Y direction, I'm going to go ahead and type in 1.5 just to make that a little bit bigger. I might even go 2 on that, just to make that a heavy-duty I-beam there. Now, I don't have to scale that in the X if I don't necessarily want to. I think that looks pretty good. Might even drag that up a little bit higher just to kind of dissect that section there. Okay, so I'm going to just drag it right up in there. looking good. We can come in, we can add even more beams. We can go across the top of our level. So I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to drag this up right across the top of my building here. And I'm just going to have that kind of stick up over the building just a little bit so that the top of that I-beam is there. And then I'm going to drag this over to the left. Okay. So let's switch this to world so we can move this over in our orthographic view. Notice how that snaps perfectly, looks great. I'm going to go ahead and take this I-beam and I'm going to switch that to 2, scale that up, and then hold down Alt, left click and drag, so that way I can scale it out and make that double the size, and it goes across the entire expanse of the building. Okay, so we've got that. It's looking good. We can create some different beams if we like. We can go down the corners of the building. We can go all the way around the top, that sort of thing. I would suggest putting in some of these beams like in areas like under this area right here. We might have something like a loading dock or something like that. It's very possible that we could have just a ramp here. So this is totally up to you whenever you start placing your static meshes. Now at this point, like I said, you would want to come in to your content browser and really take a look at what you have to offer here. And it looks like the HU prefix is going to be where it's at for us on this project. So we're going to type in HU and you hit enter, and this is going to give you all kinds of different assets that you can choose from. So we have things like pipes and fences and chain link objects like that. We've got lots of industrial pieces here that we can bring in. So start to kind of drag some of those in and play around. And what I want you to do in between lessons is just add static meshes to the building itself. And then whenever we come in, we're going to start looking at some basic materials and start placing that on our building. And I'll see you then.